Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here again with Bernie Goldberg for another episode of the No BS Zone. How's it going today, Bernie?
So far, so good, John. How about you?
Doing good, thank you. So today we're going to talk about a topic that was pretty big news at the end of last week. It still is. In fact, Bernie and I both wrote rare weekend columns on this. The Donald Trump conviction. Trump was found guilty of 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in an effort to conceal hush money payments that he had paid to adult film star Stormy Daniels. Trump is calling his conviction, Bernie, the darkest day in American history. Uh, Bernie, from what I understand, you were glued to CNN coverage of the trial. You were hanging on every detailed report. You just couldn't get enough of it. What are your broad thoughts on the trial and the verdict?
Well, I think the main point is, or one of the main points is, that you can hold two views that seem to be contradictory at the same time. On the one hand, you could believe that Trump is guilty as charged, that the jury made the right decision based on the facts that they were presented. Personally, I think Trump did everything he was accused of doing. I think he had a sexual liaison with Stormy Daniels, despite what he says. There's not a person on the planet who believes that he didn't, and that includes Donald Trump. Everybody knows that he did. And I believe that the money was paid to her to keep her quiet so that voters wouldn't vote against him in 2016. Okay, you could believe all that, but at the same time, you could believe that this trial, this charge against him, has the stench of politics all over it. That if Donald Trump's last name were Smith or Jones, Alvin Bragg, the progressive Democratic DA in Manhattan, would have never, ever brought charges against him. And if Donald Trump were not running for office, there would be no charges against him either. This was a political trial from the jump. Now, you and I disagree on one major point, John. You wrote, I think I have this right, the notion that just because Trump is politically unpopular in New York City, he can't fairly be judged by a local jury of his peers is absurd. Well, I don't think it's absurd at all. Is it possible that a jury in Manhattan, where 85% of the voters in 2020 voted against Donald Trump, could be fair and impartial? Yes, of course, it's possible. But I don't think it's likely. Because if the same jury, if a jury in let's say Alabama, in a county in Alabama, where 85% of the voters voted for Donald Trump and Joe Biden were on trial for something or other, could that jury be fair? Yeah, it could be fair, but I wouldn't bet on it.
Well, I would say in response, and I actually added this in the column too. I thought it was interesting, and I don't remember seeing this prior to the verdict, but they had released the court had released some questions that they had asked the the members of the jury to kind of get a gauge on
Right.
different things. I thought it was interesting that because like I said, it only takes one juror to hold out and create a mistrial, and you had one juror who they were given a list of all of these news sources that they turned to for their news. The only one they picked was Fox News. More compelling, another one picked Truth Social, which is Donald Trump's social media platform. Pretty clear that this guy was a Trump guy. Yet he found, along with everybody else, that he was guilty of these charges. I don't disagree that you have it's more likely in a place that's that partisan, that's that tilted is politically, that it's going to be harder to get a trial. At the same time, I think a lot of people, didn't want on this case. A lot of prospective jurors, they were allowed to leave. A lot of people took, 6 weeks out of their, well, 6 weeks, but a few weeks out of their lives to serve on this jury. I've served on a jury before where I really, really did not like the defendant. At the same time, I was able to separate, okay, I think he was guilty of this. I don't think he was guilty of this. I think we probably don't give people enough credit when we say that they're not likely to be fair and objective because of some bias.
Well, I think you're a better person than most liberals, seriously, than most liberals in Manhattan, I don't think you I think you underestimate the loathing, how much they hate Donald Trump uh, in a place like Manhattan, in a place like New York City generally. And I think all I'm saying is that that affects their thinking, and I believe that a jury in Manhattan could be fair, could set their biases aside, but I think it's very difficult. And you know what bothers me? Not about what you wrote. You're entitled to your opinion as wrong as you were about that. What really bothers me is that the media, the liberal media, they show no curiosity about any of this. They don't say, well, you know, the third ranking, I mean, Trump goes out there and says that Biden was behind the whole thing. Well, there's no evidence of that. And they point that out. They point that out every time he says it. You know, they do a fact check a second after Trump stops talking. Well, there's no evidence. But you'd think that journalists would be a bit curious and say, well, it's interesting that the third ranked member of the Biden Justice Department left the Justice Department to go and do what amounts to a trial in a county. Manhattan is a county. That doesn't, you think that would be, that would be interesting to them? You
Right.
think it would be interesting to them that the trial is in Manhattan when it could have been moved 50 miles to the east or the west or whatever, you know, still in New York, to another county in New York where he might have gotten a fairer trial. They just show no curiosity about stuff that you think any journalist would be curious about. Do you know what I'm saying, John?
No, I know exactly what you're saying, and I think a big part of the story that you don't hear, excuse me, a lot of in the mainstream media was just the pure degree of creative legal wrangling that Alvin Bragg did. First to promote these
They show no
misdemeanor.
curiosity about that either.
No, that's exactly right. And you just, I mean, it really is pretty extraordinary to promote these misdemeanor charges that had previously been turned down by the Manhattan DA's office into felony charges. Bragg also got around the statute of limitations. I think you said that earlier. What he did, I think, was legal, but yeah, it was unjust, unfair, very sleazy, and you didn't hear that part of it a lot. I heard it a lot from the sources I go to, but the sources I go to aren't the mainstream media.
Well, you heard it from time to time from uh, people they brought on to voice their opinions. So if you had a Trump supporter on, you might have heard what I'm suggesting. But the anchors, the journalists, they showed no curiosity about this contortion of taking a misdemeanor where the statute of limitations had run out and turning it into a felony. They showed no curiosity about this was one felony that Bragg turned into 34 felonies because each check was a separate felony. So now journalists can say Donald Trump was convicted of 34 felonies. I mean, this is why people have little faith in the media, because they do take sides and they take it in subtle ways sometimes. You know, they did present people who took Trump's side from time to time. They did that. I watched CNN, which promoted their gavel to gavel coverage. So so they would say, well, Trump grimaced today. Trump put his hand on his face earlier today. You know, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous. They pointed that out, that Trump, you know, smiled or didn't smile, but they don't point out that Bragg charged him with 34 felonies instead of one because it made Trump look worse. Or they didn't point out that the trial was in Manhattan because that served Bragg's purpose. And they didn't point out a whole bunch of other things that any curious journalist would have at least brought up. Enough.
Yeah, just one thing I'll add. To be clear, I don't watch MSNBC. I saw these online videos, but you had debate panels where people were sort of like in a celebratory mood over
Exactly.
the verdict. Yeah, that's I get it's MSNBC. The bar is pretty low. It's cable news. A lot of it's commentary. But yeah, I thought, man, they're really not even trying to to hide their glee over this.
Well, I'm not surprised.
I'll just add too. We talked about the jury a little bit. I think we're both in agreement. We don't really blame the jury for coming up with the verdict they did based on what they were presented with. They are now facing doxing and threats by Trump supporters. Not a good thing, obviously. I think part of this is people not really understanding a lot of the trial, which was tough. That the charges were sort of hard to understand. But yeah, I think we gotta rein it in a little bit. Bernie, go ahead.
No, I'd like to move on to the political implications of all this.
Exactly. I was going there next. So we are recording this episode on Monday morning. So there may well be better polling data by the time this episode goes live. But I wanted to ask you, Bernie, do you think the verdict hurts or helps Donald Trump as we get closer to Election Day?
Well, we don't know. That's the honest answer. We don't know. There are some who believe that it will hurt Donald Trump because anytime an undecided, by the way, Trump supporters by and large are going to be Trump supporters no matter what, and Biden supporters are going to be Biden supporters no matter what. There are a lot of people who think that this may hurt Donald Trump because when people who haven't followed the trial closely just see either a headline or hear on the news, Trump is convicted of 34 felonies. How could that help him? Well, I think it can actually. I think there are going to be Republicans out there who are on the fence, and I think there were not Democrats, but undecideds who are undecided, obviously. And I think they may say this trial was so blatantly political, so the charges that were brought were so blatantly unfair, so unnecessary, that I think that could sway them over to Donald Trump. Now, you should never come to a conclusion based on your own personal views, because that's only one person's view. I'm not voting in this election, presidential election. I didn't in 2016. I didn't in 2020, and I'm not this time around. I'm not voting for any Democrat because they don't represent my values anymore, and I'm not voting for Donald Trump because of who he is. Okay, I think Biden and Donald Trump are both unfit for office for different reasons. Okay, that said, if I were voting this time around, I'm not, but if I were, I'd vote for Donald Trump. I'd vote for Donald Trump precisely because of the sham trial that he was that he had to put up with. And I think I'm not the only one who's thinking that way.
So I should mention there were some polls right before the verdict. Again, that's a little different than after the verdict, but asking voters how they would react to Trump being found guilty. One from NPR, PBS Marist showed that 15% of poll takers said it would make them more likely to vote for Trump, 17% said less likely to vote for Trump, and 67% said it would make no difference at all. If I had to guess, I would say that's probably a good representation of how people feel now. I don't think it's, I know, I just listened to what you said, Bernie. I have trouble thinking it's going to sway that many votes. It's definitely good for Donald Trump's fundraising efforts, so that'll give him an advantage. But he brought in a ton of money after the conviction, some crazy historical amount. But I don't think that many people are going to say, I wasn't going to vote for Trump, but now that he's been convicted of 34 crimes in a way that appears kind of sleazy, I think he's the right man for the White House now. I see that he is qualified to be president. I get sort of I think people that say that and that are going to vote for him, I think they were sort of looking for a reason to vote for him anyway, and they were probably going to vote for him anyway. But personally, I just have trouble buying that. And I think a lot of people don't really don't follow the news like you and I. They don't recognize just to what extent, the politicization of that trial was, or of the charges were. So what they'll hear, Donald Trump and the surrogates carrying on and on about how it was unfair, but he's been doing that same thing about the election, about everything else, about every other thing he's being, tried for upcoming. So I don't know if people are going to buy, even if legitimate case that it was a political, indictment for sure. I don't know if many people are going to buy that unless they're really, really focused on the news.
In a close election in key battleground states, a few votes can make a very, very big difference. Now, I want to make clear, people who have followed this aren't going to be swayed. As I say, people who are planning to vote for Joe Biden are going to vote for Joe Biden. MAGA people are going to vote for Donald Trump. But the undecideds, I'm not saying every undecided voter is going to make a decision one way or another based on this election, on this trial. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying if they do, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's going to go against Donald Trump because he's been convicted of 34 felonies. I don't think we should jump to that conclusion because, as I say, I think there are a lot of people. I would be one of them if I were on the fence and wasn't sure which way I was going, and I'm leaning Republican. This trial would push me to voting for Donald Trump. And all I'm saying is I can't believe I'm the only one thinking this way. But
all right.
The question now is how is this going to play out going forward, as they say?
Yeah, well, we should start to get sort of a better feel for that, I think. So let's move on to one last part of the story: the presidential campaigns going forward. Bernie, how much do you think both the Biden campaign and the Trump campaign will actually lean into this conviction? Will Biden and his surrogates be bringing it up all the time? Will Trump and his campaign be bringing it up all the time? What do you think?
Yeah, I think both will bring it up all the time, and I think it's a mistake for Trump to bring it up all the time. Here's the thing. Joe Biden wants the election to be about Donald Trump, and Donald Trump wants everything to be about Donald Trump. And this is not good for Donald Trump, because if he comes off as whiny, if he comes off talking about how the trial was rigged, the judge was conflicted, then he's not talking about the southern border. He's not talking about crime. He's not talking about inflation. This is exactly what Joe Biden wants him to do. So Biden will come out saying, I'm fighting for you, the American people. And Donald Trump, is fighting for Donald Trump. Trump, because he's such an egomaniac, or at least an egotist, okay? Let me tone it down a bit. Because he's a narcissist, because he cares so much about himself and can't let things go. He will be making a mistake if he focuses on the verdict and not on the border, the crime in big cities, and inflation, because that's exactly what Biden wants him to do, to focus on, to come off as a complainer, as someone who doesn't accept verdicts or election results or anything like that. Trump is going to be his own worst enemy if he makes that mistake.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with all that. I guess one thing I'm wondering is whether or not Biden himself will be so focused on bringing that up time after time, or if he'll sort of allow his surrogates to do that. Well, he does have some points that he can run on, but he's not been effective at running on it so far. I think he does have to sort of focus on that.
Like what?
Well, just you got, low unemployment. You got a lot of people thought we were going to have a recession based on all this recovery from the pandemic. Never happened. He has some economic growth he could brag of.
It just doesn't resonate.
It just doesn't resonate.
He can, and there's some factual basis for that, but it hasn't been resonating with the voters.
Right, exactly.
You know why? You know why? Because when you go to the grocery store and you pay $10 for something that used to cost $5, you don't care about any of the other stuff. And if he talks about how Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, people living paycheck to paycheck don't give a damn about a threat to democracy. They care about making ends meet. and they blame Joe Biden when they can't because of inflation.
Right, right. And I think you're right too with what you said about Trump. I think it will hurt him if he really fixates on this. Like I said, he's already out there calling this the darkest day in American history. So, apparently worse than presidential assassinations, 9/11, and a whole bunch of other things. But yeah, I do. I think I don't think him really going ballistic on this stuff like he has with it didn't, obviously all the election denial stuff did not help him. The 2022 midterms pretty much showed that.
Exactly. So why would this help him? He
Right.
needs to be talking about the things voters care about. He could say, he's only human. He could say, if my name were Donald Smith, do you really think a progressive Democratic district attorney in Manhattan would have charged me with 34 felonies? Do you really think that? If you do, don't vote for me. If you think my name were Donald Smith or Donald Jones, I'd be a convicted felon. Do you really believe that? And I think most reasonable people will say, no, I don't believe that. I don't believe you'd be charged. And I think that would help him. And then he needs to move on to inflation, to the chaos on our southern border, to crime, to things like that voters care about. Because if he makes this election about Donald Trump, Joe Biden should send him a fruit basket with a thank you note in it, because that's exactly what Joe Biden wants. He wants the election to be about Donald Trump. Joe Biden can't run on his record, no matter what it might be on paper. He can't run on his record because it isn't working. He wants to make it a referendum, not on his record, but on Donald Trump. And if Donald Trump obliges, Donald Trump is making a big mistake. And you know what, John? I don't know if Donald Trump is capable, literally capable of not making it about himself.
No, I agree with that. So before we go, I did want to I didn't bring this up beforehand, but I just general thoughts, Bernie. I was curious. I actually didn't think about this when we were writing up the episode, but Hunter Biden's trial began this week. As of the time people were watching this, I think it would have already begun. He's being charged with federal gun charges. Do you have any expectations for what we're about to see with him? I don't expect it'll be the same level of circus we saw with Donald Trump, but do you have any thoughts?
Well, let me tweak you a bit.
Yeah.
The trial is in Wilmington, Delaware.
Maybe. I haven't paid that close of attention.
It is.
Okay.
They're going to find a jury in Wilmington, Delaware, Donald Trump, Joe Biden's home base. That's where his campaign is based. Could 12 people in Wilmington, Delaware be fair and impartial and find Hunter Biden guilty? Yeah, that's possible, John. Is it likely? I'm not so sure. In any event, I don't think he should be sent to prison for this. I think he should be slapped on the wrist. What he should be tried and will be tried with, and which is a much more serious allegation, is the tax evasion. Because if you or I didn't pay our taxes and paid it only after it hit the fan, we would be brought up on felony charges, as he is, and we would be in big trouble. So that's a much more serious trial that's forthcoming.
Right, I believe it's in September that's coming up. Yeah, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and just wrap it up there, unless you had anything else you wanted to add, Bernie.
I just want to add what I always add at the end. Please tell your friends, because it's not only the more the merrier. The more people that listen to us and read our stuff, the more influence we have on what's going on.
Excellent. And like I always say, leave your comments in the comment section. Let us know what you'd like us to talk about. And Bernie, thanks for joining me as always. You have a great day.
You too, John.